First speaker, Professor Nevena. She's a human rights lawyer from Belgrade, and she's also served on the UN Committee for the Rights of the Child. And as you can see from, well, if I'm out of the way, her title of the talk, it's a very important issue for us all today. So I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay. Hi. As Aisha introduced me, thank you, Aisha, very much for this nice word. My name is Nevena. I'm very happy to be here with you. I've been many times to Hungary. I've lived here on several occasions, and I have visited the CEU, Central European, no, CEU, okay. And but still, it's always nice to come back and to participate in your project. I'm an outsider. I'm not part of this project. I understand that you are a crew that has been working together for several years now on this topic, on this project, but I hope that whatever I will tell you today will fit in well. This is actually what Peter asked me to do, and I tried to adjust. He said, say something about children, and I said I would like to actually focus on children who are unaccompanied or separated children. When they are outside of the country of their origin. So before I move, I'm going to show you two short videos. Lights can stay on? Okay, I think. This one is very special. I think you will like it.
كانت كتير كبيرة. أنا أول ما شفتها حبيت. أيوة وقت ما مشينا شوي المي دخلت على القلم وكل ما نمشي يطرش علينا مي وكنت بردان كتير بعد ما بردت خفت كتير كتير رفقة عندي كان صلاة ما هضر حدا اسمي
I think it's over. There are many like that, and many produced by UNICEF or UNHCR. So since there is a strong link between, like it was stated in the disaster bioethic projects, which I studied a bit, there is a strong link between ethics and governance, especially international policy and law. So in this slide, I'm going to present this topic, and I'll move first to some of the facts, and then I'll explain more details. So, you know that how many people came through Europe in the last couple of years, or a little bit more, and this is the fact that some children were not accompanied by their families or parents. And only last year, you will see different numbers appearing here and there. I took these from UNICEF or UNHCR, which are the official sources, but I'm sure that some of you maybe work for some organizations or institutes or research projects which have slightly different numbers. Besides, you know, it's very ugly to play with numbers. Actually, we should know each and every child who was out there alone or who is missing, but unfortunately there are always projections and approximations rather than very specific information. So last year it was 25,000 unaccompanied children that arrived in Europe. Half of those came across Mediterranean so far this year are Syrians. Half of those are Syrians. So UNICEF also estimates that as many as 320,000 refugee and migrant women and children in Europe could be in need of assistance over the next 6 months. That was last 6 months ago. In Central Europe, unaccompanied and separated children represent on average 2 to 3% of all asylum claims. In some countries that rate has risen and as high as 10%. So, more facts. Because all these children, we can talk about two groups of children before I move on. We can talk about children who are small, and for any particular reason or for some particular reason, like Malek, this boy, they found themselves alone without being accompanied by adults. Of course, they are subject to terrible violations. They are subject to all forms of exploitation, and the authorities of the countries they go through have to be very careful, but we'll see how. The other group are children who are actually, let's say, teenagers, who started their route on their own. Their parents actually sent them and said, okay, go ahead, you can do it, you're on your own. Most of these children are actually boys, and they come also from Syria, they come very often from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, Iraq, but at least what we saw in our region passing through, you know, Turkey, Greece, Macedonia, Serbia, coming to this country, or Croatia, going further towards Germany and Sweden and other countries. So I just said the danger. These are some facts that show you very scary. Maybe Aisha would know something about that because she's looking into these issues. It seems that at least 10,000 unaccompanied children refugees have disappeared after leaving Europe, according to the EU's Criminal Intelligence Agency. Many are feared to have fallen into the hands of organized trafficking syndicates. 5,000 children had disappeared in Italy alone, while another 1,000 were unaccounted for in Sweden. So a sophisticated pan-European criminal infrastructure was now targeting refugees. It's interesting how businesses adjust very easily should occasion appears. So it's not unreasonable to say that we are looking at 10,000 plus children altogether missing. Only last year, not all of them will be criminally exploited. Some might have been passed on to family members, or we don't know where they are. I mean, that's the problem that EU is saying, that for some children, then they don't know where they are. So anything can happen from children. They can drown, they can lose their lives, they can lose their parents, they can be separated for months or for days, or they can go through difficult situations, they can be deprived of liberty, they can be subject to trafficking and exploitation, including sexual exploitation. But what matters, and what my intention was here today, is to actually show you that there are rules. There are international rules as part of international law, and I'm going to share with you a couple of documents which actually list standards that states must apply. Why the states are not applying, I think it is because of ignorance. It's of ignorance of those who, within government structures, also within police and social services, but also those who work directly with such children in the field. So it is very important, I think, organizations such as UNHCR, lots of NGOs, ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross, are working really hard to disseminate this information so that people know what to do when they see a child, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, because there are rules. So what are the most important sources? And you can download any of this. Of course, this is first Convention on Refugees, 1951, and Protocol 1961, Convention on the Rights of the Child, as the international treaty which obliges states to comply, including in cases like this, and all countries in the world, except for one, are actually state parties to this treaty. You know which one is not a state party? Somalia is now. Just US. Yes. But US has ratified, and US is the state party to the optional protocols of this convention, which is a step forward. So, together with convention, there are documents which are very important, adopted by the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and they are the UN document. And one of them is, which is very essential for us, and you should all have it if you ever come in a situation like this. It is General Comment number 6 of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, treatment of unaccompanied children outside of the country of their origin. There are also UN guidelines for alternative care of children, UNHCR's guidelines for the determination of the best interest of the child, and general comment also on the best interest of the child. I can list more, but if you have these, that's enough to save a child, to treat a child accordingly. And besides, you don't have to think about whether we are good people or not, whether we are ethical or whether we respect morals. You just have to apply the rules, and that's already like 90%. Then, of course, you have to work with the psychological part. So what is unaccompanied child? They are those who have been separated from both parents and other relatives and not being cared for by any adult, who by law or custom is responsible for doing so. Separated is different because they have been separated from parents, but not necessarily from other relatives. So separated children are in a little bit better position because they are not alone. They move with, or they are placed somewhere with some other group of people they know and they can trust. So what are those basic principles that our states need to comply with when they see a child, a 10-year-old girl or a 15-year-old boy? First of all, as I said, the states have legal obligations, and if you are an activist or professor or whoever, I mean, you can always remind your state that they do have obligations with regards to these children. One of the basic principles is prohibition of discrimination. So that when the child is in your territory, within your jurisdiction, you cannot treat Afghani boy different in this country, different than Hungarian child. No, it's forbidden because the Hungary has ratified that it's going to treat all children under its jurisdiction the same way. The same applies to any of our countries, of course. Best interest of the child as basis for determination of the short-term and long-term solutions. What does it mean? It sounds that like we are, like best interest of the child. It's like a natural thing, but actually there are very strict rules, and you can, in each case, you have tools how to determine the best interest of that child. A big part of determination of the best interest of the child is to ask the child what he or she wants. And another rule is that there is not such a small child that cannot, through any kind of, and through any form of expression, actually show what he or she thinks. So if you have a boy, let's say 15 years old, he's, doesn't matter where from, Afghanistan, and he comes to Serbia, and the border police decides to put him there. They see he's alone and decide to put him in a shelter for children. And in Serbia we also have several shelters for unaccompanied children, where they can also get all information and translators in Pashtun, in Arabic, in Farsi, this or that. But then the boy is 15 and he says, please, I want to move on. I don't want to stay here. I'm with group, I'm not with parents, but I'm with group of friends, and we are traveling together. We are going to Germany. And they say, no, you are 15, you don't know. It's in your best interest because bad people can come and do some harm to you. And he says, no, but I'm with this group. We've been traveling from Pakistan or from Afghanistan. We are safe, we can move on. And so there is this kind of ignorance, and very often the authorities, in belief that they are doing the best for the child, they actually make bigger harm, because what happens is, because you cannot detain that child, by the morning the boy is gone. It has almost never happened. In the last 2-3 years the children stayed because they are not locked, they are in the shelter, and they leave. They leave and they run to find their group, which is already advancing, and maybe they have made a decision which is not in their best interest, but they have to tell you also what is in their best interest. Our Minister of Social Affairs, he came out one with very stupid statement, because he also doesn't know the rules. He said, no unaccompanied child will ever leave Serbia. And we laughed, but people who watch news, they don't know. He looks to them as a nice man, and all he knows is that if I say that I will never leave, let children go out of Serbia, I may be perceived as a nice man. But actually that's not the case, because now, particularly when that kind of action prevents tracing and reunification with parents, particularly for younger children. So it's not easy. There is always, because if that boy who is 15 has traveled so far, you actually don't know whether that boy has really traveled with friends or with someone who's been coercing him into travel, someone he had previously paid to. So when you go to the field and you see different situations, you really get crazy, worrying what to do. But in the end, I see that when children are older, that very often they just leave, and that's it. So we haven't solved problem. in my country, we were not good in solving problems. We were good in solving problem reunification for smaller children who really get lost, finding their mom and dad and sister, reunification of siblings. So that's good. There is a system. You find a 5-year-old girl. Momentarily, there is a tracing system. After all, they're all on mobile phones. Even smallest children among refugees, they have mobile phones, which is strategically very important for them, for people on the move. One thing I wanted to tell you, you know that there are different definitions of migrants and refugees and so asylum seekers. So the countries are, sometimes they don't want to say we have refugees. They say we have migrants because they treat them as economic category rather than, this is why they made the division between people coming from Syria, where there is war going on, or Ethiopia, where they assume everybody is a migrant worker. When it comes to children, and children are all human beings below the age of 18, in accordance with the Convention on Rights of the Child, the state is not allowed to make any assumptions. The child is the child who is unaccompanied. So, I mean, you cannot go, as a state, you cannot go into question of status. So when the child is accompanied, that's a child who needs attention and care. So from the point of any law in any state, this must be a rule because they have ratified the convention. Right to life, survival, and development. This is also one of the basic principles, and as I mentioned, you can imagine how endangered their lives can be in all these routes, but also the states have to make sure that their lives and development and survival are not additionally endangered. I know medical professionals among you, so it's very known that this psychiatric or psychological aspect of this right to life, survival and development, which is actually the development of the child. It's not development in economic sense, it's emotional development without which none of us can actually live. So in order to support that development in all situations, including situations like those, again, the state should be ready to jump to assistance as soon as possible. Non-refoulement principle, you know what it means? You know what's non-refoulement? Okay, that's a frequently used French phrase, which means that actually there is a rule of no return. Namely, you cannot return anyone, let alone unaccompanied children, to Syria or to any country which may be considered the country of risk for that group of children or people. I mean, that's a general rule for every refugee or migrant or victim of trafficking. If, for example, your authorities have a young woman who was victim of trafficking from Serbia, from a small place in Serbia, you cannot return her to, if you don't know, if you know for sure that she's not going back to that place where she had been recruited. I mean, the states don't always follow international rules they are obliged to, but at least we are here to remind them. Very often the states don't follow rules because it's easy for them not to. But if we know the rules, we remind them, and then they cannot just say, oh, sorry. So no refoulement. No, even there was even a question whether people can be, and children can be sent to Turkey, whether Turkey is, and some parts of Turkey are actually risk areas in terms of definition of the principle of non-refoulement. But it seems that it's not.
But they do it on purpose, not just for ignorance. I don't agree with you because you are explaining the reason mainly as ignorance, not as just
Okay, I'm trying to be nice to governments, but
So we need another ways, not just a descendant.
yeah, well, there is a lot of, let's say, there is a lot of politics in that. So, but at least, you know, when governments can do that as long as they believe that their constituency is not aware. So, the you know, media, NGOs, professionals, academia. So we should be aware of that. Also, confidentiality. Anything that has to do with these children, which are unaccompanied or separated, has to be very confidential. Even, you know, to make such a little movie, you have to actually ask each and every child. This is why cartoons are, and I prefer cartoons, they're more popular, because you have to have that. Also, confidentiality with medical examination. There are often cases, Aisha mentioned the book by a boy who came to UK when he was 13, and he was subject to also medical examination because they didn't believe his age. And that's one of the rules that must apply. When the child appears to be older and claims to be younger, you always have to trust the child. Of course, we're not talking about 10 years of difference, but sometimes if for them it's very important. They say they are 17 and maybe they're 18, or they look as though they're, can you imagine, after 1 year of travel, and anyone would look much older, including children. Okay. So this is something that, I don't know, these are the rules that can help any of you if you ever are in such situation. And this is what anyone who is in contact with such a child must do: to make initial assessment, to appoint a guardian and legal representative. These children are entitled to free legal representation. So it's not that you can just dump them somewhere and not allow any assistance. Then other arrangements, the care and accommodation, full access to education. What it means? You saw that, we saw that on television. There were countries who were really nice. We saw it in Austria and other places where schools were organized for children. Sometimes they would stay 1 month or 2 months, and of course those were not, you know, old-fashioned schools like first graders, second graders, third. Children were together with lots of individual work with children, but kind of review of their knowledge, of their capacities, and it also serves as a very good psychological tool to work with children on a daily basis on something. And also access to health, which must be without any discrimination and in full attention and support of interpreters, translation, and also with respect to privacy. And so you can see all these rules start even to overlap, to integrate, because it's a big picture you must have when it comes to only one child who is out there alone. Also, what do you do to prevent trafficking? These are the measures that we discussed. You know, we have to do everything to prevent, but we believe sometimes that we can prevent it only if we keep the child locked. Like, almost as parents believe that they can prevent any damage if their children don't go out simply. So this is how we believe that that's the only way to prevent. But the message is, please don't let trafficking happen in your country at all, for anyone. And then you will not have problem with these particular children. This is a very important aspect. Now there is a lot of talk in my country about that, because it seems that we have problem with adult recruitment and mercenaries, but military recruitment and protection against the effects of war. What happens is that many children in some countries get recruited at very early age. In some countries at the age of 5 to participate in armed conflicts. So they can escape and you can find them in your country. So you have to make sure that they have good reintegration. You have first rule is for them also no refoulement, no return, and then after that you have to make sure that to check what kind of trauma they've been through, or that throughout the world you have very good services and centers for rehabilitation of children who have participated in the war. Recruiting children in armed conflicts is a war crime. It's a crime in accordance with international law. So the first case before International Criminal Court was the case of Lubanga and several other people who have recruited children for armed conflicts. First case. So it is another thing that you have to, the moment you find a child, the authorities have to look for perpetrators because jurisdiction is universal. Make sure that they are not in touch with these children or anything similar. And then, of course, by no means the children who are in such situations should be deprived of liberty. What happens is that very often children come to some country and those detention centers, refugee centers or whatever you like to call them, they're closed institutions. And children are naturally close with their parents, but sometimes even when they are alone, they're deprived of liberty, they're interrogated, they're exposed to different forms of humiliating acts and punishments, including punishment. So I think this is very crucial to make sure that none of such children end up there. And again, everybody seems to be very sensitive when they find a 5-year-old girl or 8-year-old girl or boy, but when we talk about teenagers who actually basically run away from recruitment, but also run away because they can go alone. We have to think about cultures. The cultures in the countries where they come from, they wouldn't let girl go so easily alone as they would let a boy go. And of course they want to save like any parents. So this is very important that we don't treat them like criminals and detain them, and we don't treat them as a source of trouble. You know, like risk children who can be source of trouble, but on the contrary, everyone should be welcome to our country to stay as long. Because whenever, you can take a look at these little interviews, there is not a single child, smaller or bigger, they didn't say, oh, it was so terrible in our country, the bombs were falling and it was awful, but I can't wait to go back because my toys are there and everything I have is there, my friends are there. And so this is the phenomenon. They're not here to take our jobs and to stay here, and they don't threaten us because all they want is to actually go back to their homes. So of course some will stay, and they will stay because we all move left and right, and so why not? There are other also rules for asylum seekers and how to enable asylum seeker procedures and what kind of procedures they should be, but I'm going to skip that because it's already a lot. These are the rules that I just mentioned. So family reunification, return to the country of origin, local integration, inter-country adoption, resettlement in a third country. Rules for everything. This is something I would like to finish with. Because, as you said, our governments may know or may not know, but sometimes they, even when they know, depends which, who within government. There are those who are really decision makers, big decision makers, and there are those who actually are in charge of some areas of implementing their obligations, like in this area. So, for example, my prime minister probably wouldn't, he would act as a politician, but the Minister of Social Affairs, he should know about these rules, or Minister of Health, or Minister of Education. He should know that there are children in the country who need access to education and who are not Serbs, or one of the other ethnic groups that live in Serbia. So they should be aware of that. Otherwise, I mean, they're not good ministers, but doesn't matter. This is why, fortunately, we have United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, we have NGOs, we have International Committee of the Red Cross, and I can tell you in the last 5 years in my country, I can't remember that the government organized one training on these issues. And there are many volunteers, hundreds of volunteers, not only from my country, but who came from abroad to actually receive refugees, to work with refugees, with children, to open playgrounds, and they all went to some forms of trainings. Very similar little introduction like I'm giving now. And it was all enabled by international organizations or local NGOs. And that's another question. Why, when it is obligation of every government, how come? Okay, they can delegate, they can outsource, but it would be nice from time to time to see government capable of disseminating such basic knowledge. We're not talking here about, this is not a philosophical discussion, very to the ground. So I call it very basic knowledge. And every student volunteer who worked with refugees in our country went through some kind of training for that. Also data and statistics. Again, it's, you know, it's ugly to disregard the fact that every child is a human being, and we should be able to know every child, to name, not to name, but to list every child which came through our country, which stayed in our country, and the child who went through psychological assistance, trauma. We should be prepared to make a strategic plan, like plan of action. What if in the next year another 20 come? Out of those 20,000 people, maybe 5,000 will be children without families. So what do we do? If we know all the data, and if we know what we need actually, and what the issues are once they're here, then we can be prepared much better than we were 3 years ago, which is another obligation of the state. But again, as long as there is a core group in the country which is capable of doing that, it's fine. So I would like to stop with this so that you can have comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Nevena. We've got 5 minutes for questions. So, open the floor to questions.
I wasn't provocative.
Murat?
Murat.
No.
Or comment, you don't have to expect anything.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And as you know, there's an agreement between EU and Turkey. You know, the 6 billion euro. And as far as I know, UNHCR and Amnesty International said that this is strictly against the international humanitarian law. What do you think about it? The agreement is...
the agreement is that they resettle in Turkey.
Yeah. No, the agreement is something like that. Maybe not everybody knows that. Turkey will accept somebody from, let's say, Greece, one person. In return, the EU will take one person from camps in Turkey to EU. Exchange, not just send them back.
It is not. It is not in accordance because you cannot trade with refugees.
It is an official agreement right now.
But that's not.
But that's not maybe. It's not exact. I'm
So
not sure about
The
interpretation.
agreement is the following.
Yes, please.
Any refugee passing the Mediterranean to Greece will be returned to Turkey immediately, because under the Refugee Convention, Turkey is considered a safe zone, which means we have no obligation to take them in and recognize them as refugees. As an agreement with Turkey, in order to take these refugees back, grant them refugee status again, the EU has offered to take one refugee from the refugee camps in Turkey, 1-to-1.
And UNHCR and Amnesty International says that this is against international humanitarian law. I'm asking that, are you agree with that?
I think that I don't know enough details because I don't know exactly whether it is word for word like what you're saying that they're exchanging people. It's not very clear to me. What I know that was mentioned and it's not in accordance is that it's the question whether all parts of Turkey are considered to be safe for return. That's the basic legal question. Yeah. But otherwise, I cannot say anything about this bargain exchange. It's a bargain.
Question?
Thank you very much. In a very short period of time, I had the honor of working for Frontex as an interpreter at the border of Turkey and Greece. And the story of unaccompanied children was actually something that came back a lot, especially Afghan children. And the policy of the Greek police, I think that was a national policy, was that any accompanied child was detained, separated from the family or the group of people he or she was traveling with. And they defended that policy by saying that we are not in a position to establish if the group that is accompanying the child are not human traffickers, so we can't establish that. Hence, we have to actually separate the child, and the only person who could come and claim the child would be a family member who could show that he or she is a family member. So no other family, friend, or anything else, but only a family member could do that. And police also kind of threatened families when they were detained at the border to not claim any child that is not their own as such, which meant that unaccompanied children that were traveling with a family, if the family didn't say it's our own child, because that they didn't check, the child could travel with the family, but if the family refused to say that and said the truth, and so this is a child who lost his parents on the way, which happened a lot, by the way, so coming all the way from Afghanistan to throughout Turkey to the Greek border, it happened a lot that one child was left with a family and just a parent stayed behind, and probably they will going to be there in a couple of days. But it was still an accompanied child. Do I understand you correctly that you say that the wish of child should be actually the leading, should be leading in determining if the child should travel with a group or not? And if so, how would the police be able to determine the nature of the accompanying group?
Well, but this is why it requires lots of planning and lots of people who are capable of determining the truth in the field. And I can understand that Greeks must have been, when do you say you were there?
2014.
2014?
13.
13. Very often, you know, the influx was so huge that I'm sure that they were unprepared. No one is well prepared. I know how it started in my country when the people were not prepared on the borders. So then NGOs with UNHCR, they started visiting borders on a daily basis and actually spending time on the borders, looking into proceedings and what's going on. But that's really one of the issues, because you are out there in the field. There are border crossing. There is border crossing and nothing else. I mean, and there are like 2,000 people and you have to determine for each and every person and each and every situation. So I can understand the many mistakes that can be done, and many cautions that authorities actually stick to. They are cautious because they are afraid that when they see something like that, they believe immediately, okay, let's save this child. I don't want to know. And to tell you the truth, it is well known that big percentage, more than 50% of children who are victims of trafficking in general are placed in such conditions by their parents or family or adults of their trust. So even the fact that they maybe got attached to their traffickers, and it's very difficult. So what you look into, some of the psychologists say that what you have to look in that kind of situation is emotional. You have to assess the emotional state of that child and their need to express themselves. It's very difficult. I'm not a psychologist. I wouldn't dare assessing that kind of situation, but I think it's very important that we don't make mistakes.
Hey, thank you for bringing this incredibly interesting and relevant topic to our attention. It seems to me that it's such a well-founded moral claim that these unaccompanied minors should have a privileged legal position. But there's also been a lot of criticism during the present migration crisis in Europe, saying that we're simultaneously incentivizing families to send along children unaccompanied. So as we give them this privileged legal position, we're simultaneously incentivizing families to put their children at risk on behalf of the family. How would you stand in that criticism?
Yeah, maybe that there is some logic in that, being under, I'm talking about let's say Syria and countries who are really under, who are in warlike situations, or Afghanistan. So you do whatever you can in order to leave. So of course you are informed and you look left and right, and whenever you see their opportunities, this is where you go and send your children. Because today the mentalities have changed a lot. I'm quite often in the Asia and Middle East, and no one has 5 sons anymore in order to sacrifice for some ideology or for the state. I mean, people are, the life became more precious than it used to be. So this is why I think that that may be true, but that's not you cannot talk about the fault of people, of us. Like, we are supporting those children, so we are actually inviting them or their parents to send them here. I mean, you can link anything in life, but see, these are simply two bad situations. You know, one is very bad and one is challenging. That's ours.
Question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this excellent presentation. And my question would be, in case of non-compliance, so when unfortunately it happened in many cases that the governments did not comply with international law, and civil society wanted to help for the refugees. We have, for instance, in a Kalati railway station, even children were born under such circumstances. And the NGOs, those who wanted to help, they also were threatened by violating the law. And I think it would have been extremely useful if international organizations would have launched translated leaflets about the law, about the international law, by providing of also help for those who wanted to provide shelter. And I know some people provided temporary shelter for children, and we also had this very famous night when refugees started to march in the direction of Vienna in the dark night with many children. And at the last moment, government sent buses for them to avoid casualties. But some people, even people came here for Austria, and it was a very complex situation because some people with private cars wanted to offer a lift for children. So this is a very delicate situation with international law. We tend to focus on the duty of the states, and we do not have really too much answers to the question in case of non-compliance. And if administrative law, for instance, threatens with sanctions of those people who offer a lift by car for the refugees. Unfortunately, there were some abuses. We know some cases when some were offered a lift, but actually took money from a child and didn't deliver the child to the destinations. For children, simply marching hundreds or thousands of kilometers pose a very serious threat to their health. And just to see it, I think we are contributing something which is a kind of violation of human rights, just to see that, you know, they are free to march if they are able to. And I think the very question here in the region, especially, particularly in Hungary, was the situation in case of non-compliance. There was even a campaign against the refugees. The government even subsidized the campaign against the refugees. And of course, so many people were unprepared for what to do. But those people who wanted to help, including medical doctors, many of them asked legal advice. I had received many phone calls, those who wanted to help, and actually they were threatened by not meeting the medical standards because, of course, they didn't have adequate facilities, and they came to help. There were not only child deliveries, but some illnesses, and also the children, some of them needed vaccinations, for instance. And so my question would be, in case of state non-compliance, whether civil society, I think it would be extremely useful if UNICEF and other organizations would have translated leaflets. Some leaflets were translated for the refugees, some NGOs translated what are the rights of the refugees and migrant workers, but there were no information on the international law to support those who wanted to help, and what are the limitations of the civilians' help.
Well, you're right on all points, Judith. It's true. One of the reasons you didn't have enough of this information is that Hungary is perceived that it's a European country, European Union, and it's perceived as a country who can take care of itself. So you didn't have such presence, and maybe you didn't want such presence of UNHCR or ICRC or UNICEF, because you actually don't even have international offices. You have your national committees or something like that, which obviously were not active enough. The country was, there were many volunteers, the country was prepared, but you're right, this is maybe the fact that it stopped for the moment doesn't mean that it shouldn't last. The other thing is, I mean, there is always something someone can do against the state who doesn't comply with international obligations. Unfortunately, not everything falls under obligations. All areas which regulate migrations, entry into country, this is still where states are, access to citizenship, to any kind of rights. This is where states show power and sovereignty, so they don't allow. But on the other hand, I think that European states have failed in the legal terms. I'm not talking here about how bad we are or good we are, but we have failed to implement standards. And this was not only because of Hungary you're talking about. I think it was European agreement. It came from the target countries.
May I? Fine, and then probably last question.
Hi, thank you for your interesting talk. Actually, the issue that that is really important also here. Also, this is relatively minor. During yesterday's talk, I wanted to ask that question, but I didn't have the opportunity. But it's very connected to what you're talking. So it is, in my opinion, it is an exaggeration to say that a whole community is responsible for the misdeeds of a part of the community, because you end up with in very sticky ground. So, for instance, are then in the case of those Germans who helped the Jews during the Holocaust, do they carry collective responsibility for them? Or take the example of Vichy France. So the part of France that was not Vichy France. So do people there don't carry collective responsibility, whereas those who found themselves within Vichy France, they do carry collective responsibility. So we end up nowhere in that kind of reasoning bar. But where is the big problem? As humanity in this case, are we making really a huge moral offense by not doing everything we can to stop a tragedy? Or in the case of Thomas Pogge's lecture yesterday, we're talking about every individual citizen and the responsibility of, not collective responsibility, the responsibility of every individual citizen of this world who accepts. We know that 62 people, yesterday we saw that, have the capital that equals the capital of the 50% of the world population. Where are we morally there? So if these 50% were fine, if they were healthy, if they had all the medical needs they get, if they were not hungry, it might have been fine. But where are we as do we have that as humanity collective responsibility, or is it something other than that?
Thank you for your concern and for your question. I think your main point was about action versus inaction, and one of the basic rules in international law of human rights is that inaction also amounts to violation, particularly when it comes to children. So neglect, if you look into the definition of violence, it includes neglect or inaction. This is all I want to say, and of course we could have a nice little talk about all these issues of responsibilities, but this is very clearly state's responsibility. It's similar to, I think that would have been good discussion about immunization of children, for example, in theory. So we could then discuss endlessly, but this is very clear. The state has obligation, and inaction is the failure of the state, and the state can be sued by an individual for having failed to support and assist a child.
Professor Nevena, I just wanted to, we're running out of time at the moment, so perhaps we can continue over break. But I just wanted to make a comment around unaccompanied children once they have settled. And you mentioned in the beginning around the definition of what an unaccompanied child is, and that the person who accompanying them has to be recognized by law. But I'm also thinking the point you mentioned about the children majority being males. And I know in the UK at least, there's been no underage girl child from Afghanistan. And part of the reason of this is that if an underage girl is going to be sent from Afghanistan to the UK or to Europe, she's going to be married before she leaves Afghanistan. So you're having 12, 13, 14, and some Syria as well. So you're having accompanied children, but by virtue of child marriage, and then how to handle that situation. That was my thought in this talk, but we have to think about this more as well.
So many possible situations. And where are children who are disabled? You know, all sorts of situations, who are of different gender orientation. You can have coincidence of different situations in one event like this one.
Okay, thank you very much to Professor Nevena.
Thank you. Lovely audience.
Thank you. It's a really important talk. I hope we can stay in touch.
Yes, we will. We will write to me and
yes.
You promised to send me the link for the book.
I will. And my student, she's
Thank you, Peter. Don't.
Really interesting discussion.
Interesting discussion. Yes.
I would have some further questions.
Yes, I know.
One point, I don't know whether in international law or legally they are differentiating children based on their status of, how to say, I mean, your own examples were about traveling children, So there are children in camps, there are children who are settled.
Not necessarily traveling, they are already there. It can be any situation, but children who are unaccompanied, some of them are moving and some of them are